Hello and welcome to Women's Football Today. I'm Robert Prattley, the senior editor from the Chelsea Women's Social on Twitter at CSW Social, the premier location for Chelsea women's content. And today I'm joined by Mia Eriksson to discuss the Wolfsburg game. Mia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, thank you very much. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. It's Tuesday and I'm, buzzing for tomorrow. So,
It's
but
set to
yeah.
be a very interesting, sort of a very unique sort of clash. I think two very different clubs, but I think they're more similar than they'd like to admit in many ways. And both of them will have eyes on the crown being drawn, and I think what you would call the lesser half of the draw, i.e., avoiding Lyon. But so just sort of starting off, do you want to sort of talk a little bit about Wolfsburg in the last round and sort of how they have got here in the Champions League?
Yeah, I mean, I've been following Wolfsburg since a couple of years back, and I think I mean, they have been a bit of unlucky this season with injuries on key players, and they have just returned to play again. So I think we haven't seen the the genuine Wolfsburg yet.
Mm-hmm.
uh, but I'm hoping we will get to see them tomorrow when they play Chelsea. So they have been without Eva Pajor. I mean, she last played in the finals versus Lyon back in August, and then she has been out with a knee injury. She returned to play as a sub when Wolfsburg met LSK Kvinnor in the first leg.
Mm-hmm.
And then she have been subbed on for like 4 or 5 games now. Still haven't started. So let's see tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And then their captain, Alex Pop, she was out in October with an injury in her foot, I think, and she returned after the Christmas break. And the Christmas break in Germany and Frauen Bundesliga is like two months.
Mm-hmm.
So she is back.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of if we just look at sort of Chelsea and for sort of a little bit, obviously they've had, I think you'd say, two very different games in order to reach this stage. They played Benfica in sort of the first round of the Champions League, and realistically, that was a game where Chelsea showed their class over Benfica, who themselves are a very new side at this level, and Chelsea won it very comfortably. You know, Frank Kirby broke the goal scoring record and put some, some very impressive numbers past it. Over the two legs, it was a very impressive performance. And then in the second leg, you had a very different, or the second game, you had a much different Chelsea match because they took on Atletico Madrid over two legs. And I think in the first leg, Atletico got it majorly wrong. They were playing against 10 men for a lot of the game, but Chelsea hit them on the counter attack and they never really recovered. And even in the second leg, Atleti never really looked like troubling them too much. Missed penalties aside, they didn't really create a lot from open play. And once Maren Mialda stepped up and scored that penalty, it sort of, I think you would say, made it sort of game, set, and match on the night and game, set, and match in the tie. Obviously, that's sort of, Chelsea fans are quite bullish about their prospects of reaching the final because of the squad they've got and the fact that a lot of Chelsea fans like myself will view Emma Hayes as one of the top sort of three, if not the top manager in the women's game. But sort of, I think I certainly think to an extent there's a little bit of underestimating of Wolfsburg here. So how have they done so far in the tournament, and sort of have they been hitting expectations in that regard?
Yeah, definitely. I think that they have done what is expected of them. I was a bit surprised though that they didn't score so many goals in the previous round. But I mean, they met. They were up against Spartak in the first, in the rounds of 32, and then they played. I think it was 5-0 and 2-0. So, but then they were up against this Norwegian champions, LSK, and then they played 2-0, 2-0. And I think that I was a bit surprised because they played like 4-5-1 formation,
Mm-hmm.
and that I was thinking about that because I think they have been sort of leaking a little bit too many goals than they are used to, perhaps. So that's the thing I just, you know, sort of reflected about when I watch them play now. So, but otherwise, I think, yeah, it's like you say. I think you can't underestimate a team that have been in this tournament for years. They have won it. They have played finals, and you know, so they know what they're doing.
Yeah, and they've also, it's worth noting out, they have the mentality edge over Chelsea in some way, in that Chelsea, you know, multiple times have played Wolfsburg and have struggled, and this has been sort of the final hurdle they've fallen at. And a lot of the time, that has been due to the fact that people like Pernilla Harder, who obviously now is going to be playing for Chelsea in this game, has produced incredible performances against them. So it's quite easy to see why they've perhaps decided to, you know, if you can't beat them, join them sort of mentality in that regard, and almost reversed it and gone to sort of Wolfsburg, and obviously also taken another top player from Germany in the last year by signing Melanie Leupolz. I mean, in terms of domestically at the moment, I know Wolfsburg are behind Bayern Munich. They've won 14, they've drawn one and sort of had one loss. They reach Bayern in the German Cup semi-finals, and you know, realistically, the Frauen Bundesliga is competed between them and Bayern. But do you think that at the moment they're in a better position now than they were last year when they reached the final overall? Or do you think, because obviously they lost major players last summer, they lost Gunnar Stottir, Noel Maritz, and also Pernilla Harder. Do you think perhaps they've, you know, had a bit of time struggling to adapt to that sort of situation? Because obviously losing three big players in one summer, and also the disappointment of reaching a final and being so close and not, you know, going over that final hurdle. Do you think that sort of, you know, has affected them mentally?
Not the experienced players. Like I can't imagine, you know, like Alex Pop being you know, affected in that way. She knows what she's doing, and you know, some of the younger and new players, they haven't been in this situation before, so that could be in both, you know, it could be good and it could be bad. So but I think the way they played with Pernilla Harder in their team, she had a completely different role in Wolfsburg. If we look at, I sort of thought about this today, because actually Pernilla Harder is being used in Chelsea for what her best skills are. I mean, she's a ball carrier.
Yeah,
she's one of the best in the world. If we look at numbers and stats like that, you rarely find a better player than her in that with that quality. And I think the like 6 or 7 last games Chelsea have played, Emma Hayes has really been using her for that, you know, winning the ball down on own half, turn around and carry the ball to turn the play. But in Wolfsburg, she was used for, she had a completely different role, and they have been struggling to find her replacement. I mean, they tried Svenja Huth first, because her qualities are quite similar to Pernilla Harder, but playing central behind two strikers, I'm not sure. And then what I do think about tomorrow is that Stefan Lerch, he's gonna play Lena Oberdorf in you know, central midfield position to take care of Pernilla Harder.
Yeah, and again, I think that's probably one of the big matchups you sort of look at, is that you see Oberdorf in that role, and you think, you know, she's obviously taken up that mantle that Harder's left at Wolfsburg, and increasingly has sort of been given that responsibility despite only being 19, which is the other big thing to sort of point out. And I think that's one of the big sort of key battles. The other sort of thing I think it's interesting that you mentioned there is Harder, obviously, at Wolfsburg was perceived as more of a goal scorer than I think she's at Chelsea. And whilst I think at the moment, you know, it would be reminiscent of me to say that she doesn't score goals at Chelsea, she's not quite the same, you know, out and out goal scorer and sort of out and out finisher that they have, because I think Chelsea, in that regard, can rely on Kirby and Kerr that bit more. And certainly, you know, I think it would be, apart from ESPN, everyone else would think Frank Kirby's in their top 10 players in the world at this moment in time. And, you know, Sam Kerr is on a real sort of hot streak and really looks to have adapted to WSL. And I think it's interesting you sort of say about Erbaduff being used specifically to sort of block harder in that regard, because I think, you know, there's two ways to look at that. Number one, if you can shut down the service into Kerr and Kirby through Pernilla Harder, because she does, like, you know, she does get an awful lot of secondary assists. And it's worth noting that. And a lot, you know, she has an incredible footballing brain to sort of feed Kerr and Kirby, and often they will then combine with one another. But there's sort of one avenue that says, okay, they can do that. But then the other avenue, I suppose, is saying if you're just trying to almost mark Pernilla Harder out the game, then that's one more player that isn't really going to be able to sort of deal with Kerr, Kirby, Chelsea's wingbacks, who we know, you know, Jon Anderson and Neem Charles, who I suspect will be high up the pitch. And, you know, talk about ball carriers, they've got Lurpols, they've got G, potentially, you know, Chelsea can bring in people like Wrighton and Cuthbert as well, who all have that ability and are all very, very good at carrying the ball. And it's sort of that aspect of it. So I suppose there's a bit of a catch 22. You mentioned sort of Stefan Lurch as well. I thought it'd be interesting to sort of look at him in comparison to Emma Hayes. I think it's hard to compare coaches because I think they're both doing great jobs. But again, do you think this is a case of perhaps, you know, closer than both sets of fans might like to admit in terms of their management style, or do you think you've got two very different coaches coming together tomorrow?
What I do think from watching Wolfsburg, you know, if we look at them since Pernilla Harder joined, he built a team around one player. Now it just sort of happened to be Pernilla Harder who is playing in Chelsea now. But if you look at that, and then you look at Emma Hayes, and what I was trying to, you know, explain about Pernilla Harder's role in Chelsea is that Emma Hayes' ability as a coach to use players for just one skill or quality, who happens to be the perhaps the quality that makes the player the best player they can be for their team. I think Emma Hayes is building a team that is not so, how do you say, vulnerable.
Yeah, one thing I will say, one of the real credits you can give to Chelsea, as well as being a formidable attacking outlet, is they don't leak many goals. And sort of, you know, they've got the rock solid. Okay, there's the loss of Mera Mielda, which will be felt. And you know, I think the Champions League is where you will see that more and more, because Neem Charles, though she's a very good, very talented young player, it is a position you can look to exploit. But with, you know, the defensive unit of Jon Anderson, who's a very underrated player, and then also that three of, or I suppose four if you include Ann-Katrin Berger, then Brighton, Magdalena Eriksson, and then Sophie Ingle in front of that. That's very hard to break down Chelsea in that central area. And also not forgetting the fact that Lurpols works incredibly hard and does track back, and G does track back increasingly more. So I think that's sort of interesting. And obviously also there's a bit of added spice. I think that Stefan Lurch has been quite public about his comments about Pernilla Harder since she's left Wolfsburg. And you know, obviously, I'm sure Pernilla Harder will not have take any bearing on how her opinion is of Wolfsburg, but I'm sure there'll be that element of that personal edge, just to, you know, go back and show your former employers what they used to have. And I'm sure, you know, he's been lighting the blue touch paper in the press in recent months. As soon as the draw was sort of made, it was going to be, you know, the Pernilla Harder sort of storyline was going to come to the forefront. Do you think there's going to be an element of that in the tie, of that, you know, sort of quite a lot of focus on Pernilla Harder?
I think, you know, it's journalism. I was thinking even Chelsea themselves are using, you know, this storyline, you know, in their presser conference yesterday, and what they published on the website after, to just, you know, make a statement that their team, their unit. It's not evolving around one player, because Stefan Lerch, he practically openly said that they were depending on Pernilla Harder. Even if she had a bad day, if she had small injuries, he needed her on the pitch to make the other players as good as they could be. So I do think that he knows what he also knows. I think in this is quite interesting, because like we said before, if they could go pinpoint Pernilla Harder to put her out of the play, but then they have Kerr and Kirby, who's gonna break them with their runs. So I think, and then you have a player like Frank Kirby and Pernilla Harder together. They can play the same positions, I can just imagine them looking at each other tomorrow on the pitch and say, okay, they have pinpointed me, let's switch this around. We just switch formation.
Yeah, and one of the big things you see about world-class players, the natural ability just to interlink with, and this is why I think no one's particularly surprised that Sam Kerr and Frank Kirby and Pernilla Harder link up so well. And perhaps this is also partly why Beth England at times looks a bit like a spare cog in the machine, because I think Beth England would admit herself she's not technically as talented as Pernilla Harder, Frank Kirby, and Sam Kerr, and I don't think that's unfair to say. I think she's a fantastic goal scorer, but I don't think she's technically on the same level. And I think at times, she wants to occupy that real number 9 position, which is the sort of one that Kerr likes to float into and Kirby likes to float into and Harder will sometimes occupy. And so you get situations where they all sort of, get in each other's way. But increasingly, I think Chelsea fans are starting to see the best of Pernilla Harder. And the point I would sort of pinpoint it at was the West Ham Conti Cup game when, okay, she scored a wonderful hat-trick, but everything she did that game, from the runs, the off-the-ball movement, the passing, the sort of, the creation, it was just on a different level. And that was the first time she really started playing in that hole in behind the strikers. And I think what's interesting is that Chelsea can line up on paper with sort of a 4-3-3, but a lot of the time it becomes more like a 4-4-2 with a diamond midfield, because you have Gian Leopolds tucking in and then Harder sort of floating in behind, Kirby floating off sort of more to the right but coming into central areas, and Kerr given the license to roam. And all of them have, Pernilla Harder. The thing that really surprised me, I think before she sort of came, and I knew she was very, very talented, but I didn't realize she was quite as fast as she is. And with the ball, she moves incredibly quickly. And when she gets going and sort of gets dribbling, it's very, very hard to stop her. So I think that's interesting. Sort of obviously we've talked a lot about sort of Chelsea now, and it's important to, not treat this as after the Lord Mayor's show and treat Wolfsburg as, a sort of, sideshow in this. Do you want to talk a little about sort of Wolfsburg's main threats and where the danger is going to come from for them?
Yeah, I think my favorite player in Wolfsburg is Svenja Huth. I like her a lot. She's like, she will probably play on the right wing. They will probably line up with a 4-3-3 with Huth on the right, and then we have their newly signed Sweden international Rebecca Blomqvist. She will play in the middle up front with Fridolina Rolfö to the left. And I think the main threat is Fridolina Rolfö, because she will go up against Nim Charles. And Fridolina Rolfö, she's good at everything. She's tall, she's strong in the air, and she can make great headers. But she's also, she's great with her left foot, crosses, shots. I mean, she has a powerful shot. I don't know if you saw that, but if one want to check out an amazing Fridolina Rolfö shot, they would go back. I think it was versus Thailand in the World Cup, where she just, hit the ball from outside the box, and it just went, it was like a cannonball straight into goal. So she will be a handful for Charles to handle. And like we said, if Chelsea play a 4-4-2 with Diamond in the middle, it will kind of leave Nim Charles exposed to Fridolina Rolfö. And she will have Alexandra Popp behind her. And then you have, like you see, Felicitas Rauch as a left back. So they're strong on that side. They're going to attack a lot on Nim Charles, I think.
And again, I suppose the other sort of the catch-22 to that, obviously, is that they also, as we've sort of hinted at before, they've got attacking options. I know Pauline Bremer was ruled out for the season with an ACL injury, and again, she's someone who Chelsea fans will remember from when she was at Manchester City, always used to cause us problems. But you said they've got Payor, who, you know, Payor is a world-class player, is another world-class attacker, and is someone who, if you give them a half chance, sort of, you know, if you give them one half chance and they miss it, you can't give them a second because they'll take it. Do you think they will look to use Payor from the beginning, or do you think again it will be more of an impact sub because she's still coming back to fitness?
Yeah, I think she will get on as a sub, maybe earlier, you know, like because she has been playing. I mean, the first game against LSK, she was in like for 8-9 minutes. And then she has been subbed on. I looked yesterday, and they, you know, subbed her in to play 35 minutes the last 2 games. So I don't think she's back to full fitness. So I think Rebecca Blomqvist will start because she has done it well. Also, but then you have, like, you know, a player like Ingrid Engen, you know, Norwegian international as well, playing in the midfield for Wolfsburg, and she's a great player also, strong and you know, physical. And I think I'm really, like I said in the beginning, I really looking forward to this game because I think it is going to be a great game of football. And it's not going to be a lot of goals. I don't think that, but
it's interesting you say that, because I personally think it might be the exact opposite, because I think Chelsea will want to, especially after the way Atletico sort of approached the first leg last time out, is they will want to start on the front foot and I think get some goals in sort of tomorrow's leg. Again, I appreciate it's being played in Hungary, but I believe tomorrow is Chelsea's home leg. So I imagine they will want to sort of, you know, take a lead to the away leg, for want of a better sort of term. And obviously they've got, you know, Zanet Jacabfi. It'd be rude not to mention her as well, as Wolfsburg's top scorer this season with 16. We've got Pop, as you've already said, who's dangerous. Payor, who's very dangerous. Svenja Huth, who, you know, will contribute in the offensive sort of aspect. Defensively, obviously, this is where Wolfsburg, I think, have had some issues this season. Again, it's sort of perhaps where Chelsea can really look to exploit, because they do have such a potent attack.
I think in terms of comparing center backs, I think Chelsea's center back pair is more stable. Because what I can see in front of me tomorrow, if Chelsea plays, you know, like I mean, the goals they scored versus Everton, you know, the last Wednesday, they just did it from, you know, their own box, and then 3 or 4 touches, and then it was goal. It's fast, it's quick, it's like no back-to-back, no possession football whatsoever. And I think if that happens, and I can't see how Wolfsburg's, you know, center back pair is going to keep up.
That's one of the areas that I think Chelsea can really expose, is there's a lack of pace in that back line. And if Chelsea can get players sort of moving in behind, and really, especially towards the end of the game when players are sort of tiring, because they've got those options off the bench in the likes of, again, Beth England is available for this tie, but you'd have Beth England sort of potentially to come on in the second leg. And you've got Wrighton as well, who can sort of play up there, Cuthbert, who's got a burst of pace as well. And people like Fleming can come on, who have a lot of energy. And that's sort of where I think they can have the edge, is that, you know, if there's the players running in behind, then if you're constantly playing as a defender with, you know, turning in towards them, facing back towards your own goal, running back towards your own goal, that's an incredibly difficult position to be playing in. So you don't want to get pinned like that. And with Chelsea centre-backs, Magda Eriksson and Millie Bright, they can both pass the ball long very, very well. And that's something Chelsea really have worked on this year, is being able to flip from back to front.
Yeah, and I can see it in front of me already that Wolfsburg is gonna have to work hard to prevent turnovers. They can't lose the ball in certain areas, because if I mean, look at the goal they scored at first versus Everton the other last Wednesday, Chelsea. I mean, Pernilla Harder put pressure on Izzy Christiansen, who was the ball carrier, towards Chelsea's goal, but Pernilla Harder came from behind, made her lose the ball, ended up at G to Kerr, and Kerr to Kirby, and goal. I think, that's completely different from how Wolfsburg is playing. So I think it's going to be, but this also means that Chelsea will have to succeed, with these actions.
Yeah,
it's very, very, important to mention that, because if they don't succeed with these actions, they will have a hard time coming through Wolfsburg's midfielders.
And I think it's also important to probably mention that, overall, Wolfsburg don't really get challenged a lot defensively in Frauen Bundesliga because of the nature of, them being so superior. And whilst Chelsea still have, one of the best squads in WSL and are one of the dominant teams in WSL, there are more teams I would say personally in WSL that can cause Chelsea a problem than there are teams in the Frauen Bundesliga that can cause Wolfsburg a problem. Because realistically, in Wolfsburg's calendar, it is okay. They might drop points in a couple of draws, but realistically, they're looking at the matches against Bayern and saying, if we beat Bayern, we will win the title. If we don't beat Bayern, we won't win the title. I would just think it's interesting if we just sort of move on to look at the tactics. So do you want to sort of run through the formation you think Wolfsburg will run with?
Yeah, like I said before, I think they will go for a 4-3-3 lineup with a back four, but in front of the back line, I think they will have Lena Oberdorf in a kind of a number 10 role, but she will work more defensively than in the attack, and then she will have Ingrid Engen and Alex Pop, and then the front three with Rolfö, Blomqvist, and Hutt, and I think they will attack on the flanks a lot, not through the midfield or in in the central parts. They will use Hutt and Rolfö to make crosses into, because they also have good, goal scorers that can score with headers, and that's where I think they can exploit Chelsea's weaknesses.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. It's important to note that Chelsea aren't, I wouldn't say they're physically very weak, but there are players that are tall players. But sort of Magdalena Eriksson, for instance, for a central defender, isn't necessarily the strongest in the air compared to some centre backs. And Millie Bright sort of counters that by being very good in the air, but at times she can be caught on the ball a bit more than Magda Eriksson. And I think that's where Wolfsburg could find joy.
Yeah, I think so too. So, but yeah, I think that's the way they play Wolfsburg right now. When they don't have Pernilla Harder, they will play like using their strengths during the flanks. And Fridolina Rolfö and Svenja Hutt is there. They're class players. Then you have Pop that can score goals, and you have Rebecca Blomqvist to, sort of running into the box and just do what she's supposed to do, score.
It's interesting you sort of talk about Blomqvist, because I think obviously she's a relatively new signing for Wolfsburg in that regard, and obviously there's that expectation to sort of hit the ground running at a club like Wolfsburg. But also I think it's important that the pressure isn't just solely on her, because there are other players that can provide. So I think that takes the pressure off as a centre forward.
Yeah, I think so too. And she has been doing really good, since she joined. And it's not like, I mean, she won the Swedish league with Göteborg last season. She has been top scorer in Sweden for a couple of seasons, and she knows how to score. I mean, I watched, the game. I can't remember which team they played, Wolfsburg, when it snowed like hell, and then they played at home. And I think it was her first game in the league, and she scored. Like, and coming into a new team, a new league, and just score.
Yeah,
it's so typical of her. She's a goal scorer.
Turbine Potsdam, I think, was the opponent.
Yeah, I think so too. It was that. But and she's already released the pressure from herself by scoring. Coming into a new team as a striker and goal scorer. Until you score the first goal, you will have some sort of pressure on yourself.
Yeah, the monkey on your back, and just getting that off as soon as possible. It's a big thing. And obviously, there's also Ingrid Engen as well, who is again another very talented young midfielder and a real sort of option in there, and another sort of talented sort of player sort of that is another sort of option there. So I think it's probably fair to say that Wolfsburg on the sort of midfield options, in terms of different options, they probably have the edge in that regard, because Chelsea have a lot of very good players and they're very similar players, but Wolfsburg can mix it up a little bit more.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like I said, when you look at the names in their team, no one can argue that they're not a strong opponent. It's like that. But what I think and feel is that Chelsea might perhaps have more individual strength in each position, and it's sort of funny this way, because I think there are two teams in this round of the Champions League that will know each other very well. So players know each other, like Magda and Jonna, they will obviously know Rebecca Blomqvist and Fridolina Rolfö were very good.
And obviously, a lot of them will know Melly Leupolz and Pernilla Harder as well, and that's that added sort of aspect of it. So I think there's sort of two final questions to really ask. So I'll start off with the less interesting one, I think, is that, do you think the winner of this tie conceivably can go on and win the UWCL?
Yeah, I think every team left in the tournament can win it. With some exception. I'm Swedish. I want Rosengård to succeed, but I have a hard time seeing this. But you see, I think what I do think is that it will be natural to go up against tougher opponents in the semis, because that's how a tournament works. But in terms of looking at Chelsea is the English team left on the side with the German teams, and I think that Bayern Munich is. I mean, they had like 9 different goal scorers in a game, and they've only conceded 3 goals, I think, in the league. So in terms of that, I think Bayern Munich is a much tougher opponent than both Wolfsburg and Chelsea will experience in this round. Yeah. So, but yeah, obviously, I think that both Wolfsburg and Chelsea can win the Champions League.
And I think it's important to note that whatever, again, we sort of say that kind of half of the draw. However, whichever team ends up winning the UWCL from here is going to need to beat 3 other top teams to get there. Whether it's on the other bracket and it's someone like Manchester City who are going to need to beat PSG or Lyon, and also beat FC Barcelona Femini, or alternative Barcelona Femini, who are going to need to beat Manchester City and one of Lyon or PSG to reach the final, and then one of Chelsea, Bayern, Rosengård, or sort of Wolfsburg to win it. I think it's at this point it's hard to say, maybe in the last round there were some ties you looked at on paper and thought, again, like City Fiorentina, there was never any chance of Manchester City really losing that tie, if we're being completely honest. But this time, I don't think, and even with Rosengård versus Bayern Munich, I don't think you can say that's a complete, I think it will be very tough for them, but I don't think you can say, well, no, let's be fair to them. You can't say they're here on merit and they have to be respected as such as an opponent. And they have to be respected for that reason. And if they do, turn over Bayern Munich and surprise everyone, then that makes them equally dangerous, I'd say, in the semis, because then they're at a point where they've got nothing to lose and they've got the confidence of turning over Bayern Munich. So yeah, I think it's perfectly fine. I think moving on to the final question is who are the favourites for Chelsea versus Wolfsburg and why? And I am going to make you answer. I'm not going to let you say there's no favourite.
You mean the team I favorite?
Who's the favourite for you to progress from the tie?
Yeah, I think football-wise, it's Chelsea, because I think it's like you said it yourself. They were up against the toughest opponents in the last rounds with Atletico Madrid, and then they showed stuff like mentality and courage and strength and what I do think about Chelsea is that it's the football they play. It's not always pretty, but they win. And that's what I think will set these two sides apart tomorrow.
And they remind me a little bit in that regard of Bayern Munich, in that they're very efficient. And okay, I'm not going to pretend as a Chelsea fan. There have been games where Chelsea have really turned it on and played brilliant football. I think recently in the Conti Cup final, they played superbly. But at the same time, they were ruthlessly efficient. And when they beat the same opponent 9-0 earlier this year, that was another game where they were ruthlessly efficient. And if they can be that ruthlessly efficient in front of goal, then it's always dangerous playing Chelsea, because a 1-0 lead can turn into a 2-0 lead, can turn into a 3-0 lead. And even against the best teams in the sort of WSL in the world, they've already seen it this year against Arsenal in the Conti Cup games and against Manchester City in the league. Chelsea can quite easily go ahead and score goals quite freely. And against Manchester United, sort of, even though that ended 2-1, the opening 20 minutes of that, were one of the most dominant 20 minutes I've seen all season. So I think it's important to, from that perspective, I think they are. Interestingly, I'm going to sort of, even though I'm a Chelsea fan, I think Wolfsburg are probably favourites for the tie. And my argument for that is that they have the experience and the numbers. And there are so many very good players in the squad, but there's also been a squad that's been there for longer. And I think because they've lost, the real world-class star, the best in the world option in Pernilla Harder, that's forced a lot of players inwardly to sort of, look at themselves and say, well, now I've got to step up that little bit more. And when you have a whole squad that does that, you can go on and sort of do amazing things. The other benefit that they have, and again, I think it's slightly lesser, this one, but Wolfsburg have the ability to know that if they want to rotate most of their side for the weekend in order to keep players fresh, they can afford to do that in Frauen Bundesliga and still come out with a result, provided they're not playing Bayern this weekend. And as luck would have it, Bayern have not been put on the fixture calendar. But if, in Chelsea's case, in WSL, I think they probably have to, they can afford to rest one or two of the players, but they can't go for a wholesale sort of resting of them because there's a harder level of competition. But I think it will be a very, very interesting tie. I think it's very hard to predict a winner. Again, I personally think there will be goals. You don't think it will be much of a goal fest, which sort of shows that it's very interesting from that perspective. Again, I think it's now important just to start sort of wrapping up. So, yeah, Chelsea take on VfL Wolfsburg Frauen tomorrow at 3 p.m. GMT. And what time is it in Sweden, Mir?
No, I think isn't it 16:00 GMT UK time?
Is it 4 o'clock GMT?
Yeah, I mean because it's 5 o'clock in Sweden, so I'm pretty sure it's. I thought
it was 3 o'clock GMT. Okay, ignore that last minute. It is Chelsea take on VfL Wolfsburg in Hungary at 4 o'clock GMT tomorrow. The game is being played in the Ferenc Zatuza Stadium. Apologies to any Hungarians that may be listening. I've just butchered that name there.
I'm sure you're excused. You can mention that this game will be broadcasted at BT Sport in the UK, at Sportbladet Play in Sweden, at VG Live in Norway, and on Sport 1 in Germany, along with being broadcasted on Wölfe TV, Wolfsburg's own YouTube channel, and Chelsea on the Fifth Stand app and the website. It's a couple of more countries. I know it will be geo-blocked in, but
yeah,
we will have that in our preview on the Chelsea social.
we will. Yeah, if you want any more Chelsea content, please do feel free to check out at the CFCW social on Twitter, and also check out myself at RJP Journalism if you want to see my own thoughts on Chelsea men and Chelsea women. And where can we find you, Mia?
Yeah, on Twitter too. You can find me with Mia_Eriksson with K and 2 S's, like Magdalena Eriksson as well.
And of course, keep following Women's Football Today on Twitter at Women's FT. And yeah, looking forward to a fantastic tie.
Me too. It will be great.